We will maybe talk a little bit about Facebook, which, as some people in the room know, I have some thoughts about, but that's not the main thing we're here to discuss.
This book I read, I'm trying to remember its name.
You read it? Oh, good, thank you. Well, so what are you doing now?
Me personally?
Yeah.
So I joke that I left one job just to have 3 jobs instead. So I still am 2 days a week at Meta as a senior fellow, so I help advise the company on AI and other technological bets. But the bulk of my time now is spent on trying to fight climate change. You know, I think I had a COVID crisis like a lot of people and thought, man, there's something I got to do about this. And I started philanthropically by sort of funding science and policy work. And then bumped into lots of interesting entrepreneurs who I could help using my skills scaling teams to build the companies that are going to help decarbonize our economy.
Just on the scaling teams, on the prep call, I asked him about the growth of his team. When he arrived at Facebook, he oversaw 150 people. That was in 2008?
2008, yeah.
And when he left, he oversaw 35,000 engineers. So he learned something about scaling, and scaling is now kind of your obsession, right?
Yeah, I mean, I like to joke, it's, you know, hyperscaling for climate is, you know, if we're going to solve these problems, we need to build lots of stuff. We're going to need a lot more solar, wind, batteries, new next generation power generation. We're going to need to decarbonize everything, electrify everything. And that's going to require lots of scale up. And, you know, I look back at Meta when we released our first data center in 2011 in Prineville, Oregon. It was a beautiful state-of-the-art facility, 300,000 square feet. Last year, we built 3 million square feet of data centers, and we're on track to probably 10x that. So in 10 years, we've 10x'd the sort of scale of these things.
Physical infrastructure.
Physical, these are buildings, 3 million square foot buildings in 16 places all over the world. And so that sort of level of scale up is important. I think there's this sort of theme that we don't know how to build stuff anymore, meaning the United States or humanity. We can't build big projects. I think that's nonsense. I think there's places where we're bad at it, but in order to solve the climate crisis, we're going to have to build a lot of new stuff, and we have to do it really quickly because we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, and you think that this kind of, we've had a presumption in the internet industry that extraordinarily rapid scale was almost trivially easy if you had the right idea, right? Because it just could burgeon. But you really believe almost the same thing is possible in physical infrastructure.
Well, we've seen it. I mean, if you look in the last 10 years, the price of lithium-ion batteries and solar cells have gone down 85%. And even more shocking, wind turbines have gone down about 55% in the last 10 years. And that's mostly because of scale. We're producing a lot of these things in factories, and there's a thing called learning rate, which is as you do something over and over again, you get better at optimizing it. And the higher scale you do something, the more that learning rate improves. And so what we learned in data centers, if you go fly over our data centers and I don't tell you where you are, you would have a hard time picking them out because they all look the same. They're the same shape building, we build them the same, we find places, and that's why we could build them so rapidly.
You kind of really modularized the process. That's very pertinent to what will be the immediately following session, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Modularize these massive buildings. They're massive buildings, but we break them into chunks, and we break each rack into chunks, and then you can roll these things out at massive scale. And so when we do this as humanity, we can do things very quickly. That's why solar works really well. This is why lithium-ion works really well, because the cell is ultimately the unit of that battery, and we can produce those at massive scale. And even wind turbines have gotten pretty big, and those are pretty big pieces of infrastructure.
Is there a degree to which artificial intelligence, which is something you're extremely knowledgeable about, could play a role in also accelerating that design and build out of physical infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, this is the most exciting thing, because I think, if we looked at I started my career in the 90s, and in the 90s we would ship and sell packaged software. So we'd ship you a CD or a floppy disk, and you'd buy it in physical. And then we had the move to online services and what's called SaaS now, where you get everything over the internet. And I think one of the big transitions there that people don't understand is the ability to iterate really quickly. So when I was shipping packaged software, I'd release you a new version every year or so. So if we got something wrong, it would take a long time to fix it and improve and get feedback from the customer. When I joined Facebook Meta in 2008, we do a site update once a week, a major one. By the time I stepped down, we were doing them continuously. So throughout the day, we're making changes. And that speed of iteration is, I think, the secret sauce to a lot of technology. And I'm seeing it in the climate space. So I've looked at a company that's trying to grow lab-grown beef cells. So I ate a burger that was...
Which company is that?
This is Sci-Fi Foods. They're in Oakland, California.
Yes, I've heard them speak.
I had a cheeseburger that didn't come from an actual cow. It was beef cells grown in a vat, basically. But the exciting thing about that company is not that. It's how they're talking about rapid experimentation of cell lines. How many experiments they can do per day to figure out how to to how to make something that's going to grow really well. And I've seen this theme across the best companies. It's rapid experimentation. It's applying AI to understand materials discovery. We're trying to make very cheap hydrogen or other materials. How do I build a catalyst that works really well? Well, there's a lot of materials in the world. You can use AI to help sort through all of that and figure out what the optimal material would be for your particular project. And these things are just accelerating the pace at which we can develop things. Because in order to solve climate, we need things that don't have a premium to them. They need to just be better than the alternative.
Or cheaper, yeah.
Cheaper, right?
Yeah.
So it's a yes and. It's good for the climate, and actually a whole bunch of people make a lot of money along the way. Or it's a better product for consumers. That's how we're going to get adoption of these things. And that requires technological innovation. That's the magic of technology. It removes the trade-offs.
You are bringing an engineer's mindset to an important problem. Thank you. Talk about Commonwealth Fusion Systems. Tell us what that is.
So Commonwealth Fusion Systems is a spin-off of MIT, and they are in the process of building a fusion reactor about 30 miles outside of Boston. Right next to the fusion reactor is another factory that they're using to build these these superconducting magnets, which is the key innovation that they've made. And if you sit down and talk to them, you hear fusion is this thing you hear about in science fiction and what powers interstellar spacecraft and things like that. But they've moved it out of the realm of science and into engineering. So most of the problems they're facing are actually building this thing, not worrying about the science of making it work. But the idea is to harness the reaction that is at the center of our and every sun, which is a fusion reaction, combining atoms together, produces clean energy. It's the most energy-dense reaction humanity knows in the universe. But you can build this in a very small area and produce basically unlimited free clean energy. And if they get this to work, we could basically have unlimited free clean energy, nearly free, wherever you want in the world.
Was that one of your first investments?
It's a company that I help supporting. They've raised billions of dollars, so they're outside of my check size. But
okay, so that's it.
But I give them free help because I want them to win.
Is that what it is? Okay, I meant to ask you. But they are, I believe, the most heavily funded startup in the United States.
In the climate tech space, they probably are. They've raised about $1.8 billion.
They've raised $1.8 billion as a private company. As a startup.
Yeah.
That's just kind of amazing. But
yeah. And there are
because it costs a lot of money to build physical stuff like fusion reactors.
It does, and I think people want to see it work before they're really willing to, get a bank loan to build the next one. And that's the challenge with most of these companies, is you need to build the first one and say, look, it's working, it's making power. Now, if you give me X amount of money, I can turn that into profits every year at this amount.
It's especially critical in fusion because it never has worked. I mean, we know that the theory is that it will work, and these magnets there, which suspend the reaction, I guess, into some kind of contained
you have this thing that's so hot, anything it touches, it will destroy and vaporize. And so you can't contain it with any physical medium. So you basically use a very strong magnetic field. They built a magnet that's 20 times the power of a magnet in an MRI machine. So if you've ever been in an MRI machine, they make you take off all the metal because the magnet will suck it all in. Well, think of a magnet 20 times that power. And that is what contains this superheated plasma. And then it fires neutrons out that hits a material that turns into heat, and that's how you make energy out of it. So there's a bunch of really interesting challenges. But again, and back to AI, if you talk to the challenges, how you actually maintain this magnetic containment is a software and modeling problem.
Right.
You have to build all this physical infrastructure, but at the end of the day, the thing running this is some software to help make sure that the field keeps the plasma from hitting the containment wall.
So you're confident that fusion will work?
It's a matter of when, not if, in my opinion. Now, I hope it happens sooner rather than later. It's going to take a while. We're talking probably 2030s, but
2030s before what happens?
Well, there's two milestones to hit. Right now, we're trying to hit a milestone where more energy comes out than you put in, because you put a tremendous amount of energy in to create the reaction, usually with lasers, depending on the technique. And that's called Q greater than 1 is the measure of energy. But you need a much higher output of energy than that to turn it into useful electricity, because there's a lot of losses along the way. So I think we'll get Q greater than 1 in this decade, and I hope we'll have viable energy, electricity generating plants in the 2030s.
When would it be? I mean, obviously, the great thing about fusion, if it were to work, is it is the closest thing to a silver bullet that one can imagine, simply because it does create vast amounts of clean energy. It's expensive, but the question is deployment and how, let's say all that happened. How soon could, let's just say, a substantial portion of the world's energy potentially be provided by fusion, would you guess?
I mean, it's still going to take, you probably need tens of thousands of these plants constructed, at the scale. And people don't understand the scale of the energy infrastructure right now. And unfortunately, in 2022, emissions are going to be the highest ever in humanity's history. So with all this great technology, we're still burning a lot more fossil fuels than we ever have. And this year, there are 300 coal power plants currently under construction or planning throughout the world. So we're not only still using them, we're building new ones because it's cheap. And people deserve and want cheap, free energy because it's how you get a good, high standard of living, which is why we need these technological advancements. So I think fusion will be many decades. So it's not the sort of thing that we can all just sit back and wait for fusion and everything's good. There's a lot of work we need to do in the interim.
Well, one of the things, and you're setting up Paul Hohenberger so well, it's great. But one of the things you were talking about when we were prepping was also the ability to upgrade the existing infrastructure very rapidly.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that, because there is such a need explain first of all maybe why we need to do that, and then what you think is possible.
Yeah, there's all these little sounds like mundane problems, but okay, great. Solar and wind, super cheap, really great. We have built our existing power infrastructure where we have power plants relatively close to city centers. So the electrons don't have far to go to get from a gas power plant, which you can have right in the East Bay, powering San Francisco, no big deal. If you want to power San Francisco with solar and wind, you need to put that stuff pretty far away because the wind is blowing over the ocean or in the flats. You need a lot of space for solar. So those electrons have a lot longer distance to go, which means we need a lot more transmission capacity. It's estimated we need to have about 5 times as much power capacity in our grid as we have today. Now you run into all these real world problems, which is, to put a giant, 400-foot pole in someone's backyard, nobody wants that. Right, and you have regulatory approval. In
order to build the power lines that are big enough.
You got to put giant poles up to do it, and it's a 2-year wait to even get the study done to get new transmission lines put in. And so again, this is a place where technology can work on it. So there's another company outside of Boston called Veer, and they're basically said, we're using actually the same high temperature superconductors that Commonwealth Fusion is, and we're using them in power lines. And so you just rip out the wire and put a new one in with some new cooling infrastructure, and we get 5 times as much power through the existing grid, as opposed to having to build new lines or new poles or any of the rest of this. So I think of it as a regulatory hack. So instead of having to get regulatory approval for a whole bunch of new stuff and get all the landowners to approve to it, say, nothing looks very different. Maybe there's a little box up there and a different wire, but it gets 5 times as much power because of this technological innovation.
And it uses superconducting magnets to
it reduces the superconductors basically reduce the resistance of the wire. So the challenge is when you're sending current through a wire, it has a resistance, which means you lose some of that power to heat. You have to up the voltage in order to overcome that resistance. When you up the voltage, it's more dangerous, so you have to make taller towers in order to make it safe. And so they say, you don't have to up the voltage, we just reduce the resistance with these superconducting materials, and you can get the same amount of power through without raising the voltage. Okay. Again, all sorts of wonky stuff, but it basically means instead of building giant towers, you can just run 5 times more power through the existing infrastructure. And that sort of thinking is what we need, this sort of solve the hard problems with technology so we can get there faster.
I'm glad you're doing that thinking. I want to ask you some things about the internet industry, but I'd like to go to the audience for questions on this sort of stuff first. Does anybody have comments or questions about, the kind of amazing stuff that Mike is investing in and working on? Please back here, and then identify yourself when you speak.
Sure. My name's Chris Ryan. Appreciate this, Mike. What are you most optimistic about, and what are you least optimistic about?
Good question.
What am I most optimistic about? I'd say electric vehicles, electric cars, I think has tipped now or will tip shortly into a rational economic decision for most people. It's just cheaper to run and operate. Fuel's cheaper, maintenance is cheaper, et cetera. So I think that's on a takeoff. I am least optimistic right now about heavy industry. So cement, steel, all the chemicals we manufacture. Cement alone, it's the second most used material on Earth after water. It's 8% of all emissions. It's a terrible emissions process to make it, and it's very challenging to make that emissions-free and cheap. But we're going to need a lot of it because all the stuff we're building needs cement. So I'm currently looking at some solutions there, but currently pessimistic about it being solved.
I don't know if you noticed, but we have U.S. Steel on our program today. I hope you can stick around for that because they have a very impressive story of progress in that industry, at least in that company. It was here, another hand here. Get the mic over here, and then we'll go over there. It's coming over here, Charlie. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlie Long from Oakland, California. What's your reaction to the way in which the public utilities are trying to kill rooftop solar, and which seems to me, given the fact that I'm working on a commercial rooftop solar and battery grid connected system, which the utility is fighting like crazy, it seems to me that those kinds of decentralized distribution or generation and firming dynamics are in the interest of dealing with climate change, but the utilities are fighting it.
Thanks. Okay.
So what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that also makes me pessimistic is the challenge in a lot of these changes are going to be disruptive. Like that is a change to how your utility grid operates, which is why they're fighting it. All of this cheap wind and solar and new power grid is disruptive to fossil fuel interests. And so there is a lot of companies out there that will fight because it's a change in their business in some form, and will use regulation and other ways to sort of fight and slow stuff down. So, I think it's a bummer, but it's something we've got to basically power through.
Okay, over here. Thank you.
Hi, Vaibhav Parikh, a lawyer from India. As lawyer, you mentioned that there are regulatory challenges whenever you implement a new technology. We as a law firm do a lot of research work precisely for that, because what we try to do is look at the new technologies, new business model, and try to identify issues so we can start working ahead of them. So by the time the technology is ready or business model is ready, we have some legal solution. That's what we try to do. But my question to you was, what is the challenge which you feel that the regulatory obstacle or regulatory, because the government is not moving at the speed at which science is moving,
Right.
is what is creating an issue in implementing the hyperscaling your climate innovation? And
Really good.
what should be done parallelly so that you reduce that time frame?
That's a great question. I mean, I think there's
Thank you.
a number of places. So one is, next generation nuclear. So we talked a lot about fusion. Fusion is in the 30s. We have the technology in our grasp to build much safer, clean fission reactors, at massive scale now. Like we can start now, but that's a very hard challenge from a regulatory, the NRC hasn't approved a new reactor design in decades, as far as I know. So that's a huge one. I talked about the power grid, and we talked about the power grid here. This is a place where the federal government could say to the utilities, you can't do that. Like you have to allow rooftop solar. Here is the baseline. And we've done this in the past. When we built highways and other things like that, you say, look, there's projects that are for the collective good. We need to allow for some basic baseline regulations at the federal or the state level, and don't let every single municipality along the way obstruct for whatever reason.
Well, and that has happened in some states.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the IRA is a huge step forward in the United States. And I think as the climate impacts become more obvious to people, and as there are more climate-fueled disasters, I think the voters are eventually going to step up and say, enough with this nonsense. Like, we just need to start building these things.
Okay, I want to ask you about two things that are not about energy and climate, although if Jane has a question, I might get to that, but maybe not, because, it's very...
I'll talk fast. We'll get to Jane.
It took a little bit of discipline for me not to ask you about Meta and Facebook.
You've got 20 minutes.
I've got 4 minutes and 22 seconds
David,
left.
I am beyond impressed.
But, and I'm not
gotta
not
go.
even going to
Been
cast
nice.
the question that way. I'm not even going to cast the question that way, but I'm going to cast it this way. We have a session
let's talk about
tomorrow that Andrew Keen and I are going to talk about what we're calling the internet industry implosion, which there is an incredible sea change underway in the industry where you have spent your career. What do you see happening at the macro level right now? Why is this change happening at such incredible speed and scale? To speak of speed and scale.
Speed and scale. Yeah, well, I mean, let's first level set for, we're talking about my other job here at Meta. Meta's still a profitable company. So
one of the most profitable.
So this is I went through the dot-com bust in the 2000s. This is different in the sense of a lot of unprofitable businesses went under. There are a lot of unprofitable businesses out there, and they're going to really struggle over the next couple of years because tolerance for growth has sort of gone away. But we saw just a seismic shift in the last 2 years. The pandemic, certainly in the United States and Europe, completely changed consumer habits. Everyone went online, everyone was ordering things, and we've sort of reverted back to the normal life in real world. And so it has just, in a short period of time, completely flip-flopped the sort of demand and supply for a lot of businesses out there. And I think everyone is just adjusting. A lot of companies grew really fast in the last couple of years because they said, wow, we see growth curves that look like this, we need to sort of fuel our capability, and then the growth curves look like this, and we need to readjust. And that's a painful process for everyone.
Okay, what about going to Meta for a second? What do you think about the criticism that Meta, in changing its name and making this vast $10 billion a year shift to metaverse at a time when its other business was hitting all these sort of, major headwinds, was ill-advised?
Well, look, I actually get the criticism based on what everyone's ability to experience in the metaverse is right now. If you see a picture of a cartoon selfie of an avatar out there, and
with no legs,
with no legs, right? And you're like, that's what you're spending millions of dollars on? Like, I get that criticism. That makes sense. What's missing is, and we've done a poor job of explaining this, is all of that money is going towards long-term R&D for the actual technological enablers for things that I've seen in the lab, which is not a cartoon avatar, but someone that looks like a real 3D person who's talking to me in real time who happens to be across the country. Right? And you literally have this experience like, oh my gosh, this is the closest thing I've ever had to being here in person without having to travel to see this person. And that technology is years off, but is a lot of what we think of when we think of metaverse. That remote connection, ability to really feel there. It's 95% the same. It closes that gap between Zoom and I had to get on an airplane, right? And there is going to be an experience between those two. And that's, I think, where we're going and where a lot of the technology just hasn't shown up in the hardware yet for people to actually experience it in the real world.
Mark should put you on stage to say that because, that's a very positive vision. And if you really think we can get to a place where we can really feel like we're there with another person, even though we're not, that would be a huge step forward especially for climate, because think of all the jet fuel we could save.
Yeah, I mean, it's a ton of carbon to fly across the country and back, right?
Yeah.
We measure carbon utilization of our services per person per year in grams. So, it's 100,000 times more efficient. I don't think, 3% of the world's population flies regularly. I don't think we can get the whole world to fly all the time, but I do think we can get them all to experience the metaverse and real-time presence.
Luckily,
that to me is a transformative technology and something we need to work on.
Luckily, you do talk fast. Musk and Twitter, what the hell do you think is happening there?
I'm not going to comment on that one. What do you want to know?
I don't know. I just wondered what you'd say, because it's very distressing to watch what's going on, and it seems so crazy. I mean, it's just, this is a company you've kind of grown up with as a small competitor for what you were doing, but it's critical infrastructure in a certain sense.
Well, I think everyone is watching in real time how difficult it is to moderate a system where it isn't about physical constraints or cars or rockets, but is helping a lot of people figure out what the rules are, and people are very creative about getting around them if they want to.
Yeah.
And this is the challenge, I think, in moderation we've had in a long time, and I think will be interesting to see how it plays out.
Okay, good. Jane, real fast.
Yeah.
Give you a much more mundane question.
It's all good.
So California has a law that we have to go to zero emissions in electricity by 2045. And I recently completed a study showing that it doesn't really matter how much nuclear power and carbon capture and storage cost, that by putting them in place, that's the cheapest form of electricity on a system basis. What's the market change that will allow people to make that kind of decision? Because basically we make a decision on a per plant basis instead of on a systems basis.
Very interesting question. Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can either get there through market economics or through government action. And I think we're seeing a little bit of both in market economics as some of these things become cheaper than existing systems, and you're seeing things like the IRA and others, the government step in. And I hope that we're going to attack, we're going to kind of dig the tunnel from both sides like we did under the channel and sort of get there in cheap and government action, hopefully.
We do need government vision that we seem generally to lack, although California is making some great progress. Mike,
David,
thank you so much for
nice
being
to see you
here.
again.
Really exciting to see the commitment you've made to climate.
Thank you.